Good afternoon, everyone. Today's training is going to be on the paid lunch equity tool. So how to complete that paid lunch equity tool for the 25-26 school year. Before we really dive in though, I just want to remind everyone that we did send a memo out last week that we will not be covering the average meal cost on today's training. It will only be on completing the paid lunch equity tool. So if you are a non-pricing, meaning you are CEP, you do not complete the paid lunch equity tool. I see several people on here that are non-pricing. So this training does not pertain to you. So I just wanted to make that clear before we get started. All right, so let's talk about the purpose of the paid lunch equity tool. So regulations at 7 CFR 210.14E require that each school year SFAs must establish prices for your paid lunches. So like I just said, non-pricing schools are exempt from this requirement because they do not charge for meals. For additional guidance, you can refer to the following USDA memos that are linked on this slide. The first one is SP 39-2011. It's the revised child nutrition reauthorization of 2010, and it basically gives you the guidance on paid lunch equity as well as revenue from non-program foods. And the second memo is SP 12.2025, which are the specific guidance for the paid lunch equity tool for the 25-26 school year. So like we just talked about, one of the memos, SP 12-2025 is for the guidance for next year's tool. So for 25-26 school year's tool. So we're going to talk about who qualifies for the exemption and who does not qualify for the exemption. So the SFAs that qualify for the PLE exemption is an SFA that has a positive or zero balance in the nonprofit school food service account as of June 30th, 2024. So you would be exempt from doing the PLE pricing requirement found in the regulation. However, it's not required, but those exempt SFAs still can use the PLE tool to complete the steps necessary to determine their target paid lunch prices for 25-26 school year, again, that are consistent with the program regulations, and adjust their paid prices accordingly. So even if you have a positive balance, you're not required to do the PLE tool, but you may still want to do the PLE tool to see where your prices should be for your paid lunches. And then the SFAs that do not qualify for the PLE exemption are those that have a negative balance in the nonprofit school food service account as of June 30th. So you must follow the PLE requirements and regulations to establish your paid lunch prices for the next school year. So let's talk about the paid lunch equity calculation. So SFAs who on a weighted average charge less than the target weighted average price of $4.01 for your paid lunches in the previous school year, so in 24-25 school year, you will be required to make an adjustment to your weighted average price for the 25-26 school year. This adjustment will be made by adding a 2% rate increase plus the most recent consumer price index of 4.03% to the weighted average paid lunch price from school year 24-25. So this is basically just explaining how the calculations work. So to calculate the weighted average price requirement for 25-26 school year, SFAs will need the unrounded weighted average price requirement from last year, from 24-25. And then once that weighted average price requirement for 25-26 has been calculated, you will then need to decide how you want to meet the requirement. And we'll go over each one of those choices that you can choose from. So to continue on explaining about the calculations, SFAs have a choice on which method they would like to use to meet the weighted average price requirement for the school year. So you have three different methods that you can choose from. So method one, you're going to raise your average price of paid lunches. Or method two, you're going to contribute revenue from non-federal sources to the nonprofit school food service account. Or you can choose to do method three, which is basically splitting the requirement by raising your price of your paid lunches and contributing non-federal sources to the nonprofit school food service account. So it basically combines methods one and two. So regardless of what method you choose, the tool takes into account any shortfall or credits that are being carried over from 24-25 school year into the calculations for 25-26 school year. The tool will also determine whether any shortfall or credit will need to be carried over from the 25-26 school year into the next school year's 26-27. So detailed instructions on how to use the PLE tool can be found in the instructions tab of the tool itself. The tool was going to be added to the CMP website earlier today. It's going to be under the School Food Service General Forms. So once you click on it, it is an Excel spreadsheet. And on the different tabs, they have different title tabs, and the detailed instructions are on the instructions tab. It is highly recommended for SFAs to read the instructions in entirety before beginning their calculations. The PLE tool assists SFAs because it's going to calculate the weighted average price requirement for 25-26 school year. It's going to also calculate the required weighted average price increase for 25-26 school year, as well as the required revenue from non-federal sources for 25-26 school year. So this is the information that you're going to need to actually complete the PLE tool. So you're going to need the requirement for this 25-26 and the required price increase. So you're going to have the unrounded price requirement from your 24-25 school year or the most recent school year for which that data is available. And if that value is not known, then the SFA will need to go all the way back to 2010-2011 school year for the average price for your paid lunches. So hopefully you have your tool from last school year, because we'll talk about where you can find that information in last year's PLE tool that you completed. You're also going to need all of your paid lunch prices for October of 2024. You're going to need the number of paid lunches served associated with each paid lunch price for October 24. So meaning you need, if you charge different prices for different grade levels, then that you need all different grade level prices. And then you're going to also need the total dollar amount of shortfall or credit being carried over from school year 24-25, which that will also be found on last year's tool. And then SFAs that opt for methods 2 or 3 that are going to be contributing the revenue from non-federal sources will also need your total number of paid lunches from 23-24. So you need a lot of prior year information. So the PLE report. So it is recommended, like I just talked about needing previous year reports, that you have your paid lunch equity report from your 2024-2025 available for reference, as much of this information needed to complete this tool for 25-26 is summarized in that report. So SFAs will be able to generate the paid lunch equity report for 25-26 when calculations have been completed, which will be helpful to reference when you're completing the tool that's for 26-27. So always keep your previous PLE tools because you're always going to need to reference it back for completing the next school year's tool. So let's go over some more instructions about the paid lunch equity tool. So the paid lunch equity tool was created to help SFAs calculate their new weighted average price requirement for the school year and determine what price increase is needed to meet that requirement. Again, we talked about this previously. There are 3 methods for how SFAs can meet their requirement, and the tool assists with making those calculations based on the method that you choose. So the version that we're going to go over today only applies to school year 25-26, as a new version will be issued for next school or the following school year 26-27. So throughout the tool, the cells that are shaded in green color are designated as data entry cells. So the SFA must enter in the data in these cells for the tool to make the appropriate calculations. So just as a reference, the PLE tool consists of 8 tabs. You have a guidance tab, you have an instructions tab, and then you have the different tabs based off of what method you're choosing. So you're going to have the 25-26 requirement calculator, the 25-26 price raise calculator, the 25-26 non-federal calculator, the 25-26 split calculator, and then your 25-26 report, and then also that 2010-2011 price calculator for those that need to go all the way back to 2010-2011. So you will follow the specific instructions pertaining to the method that you choose to meet the requirement, and only use the calculator tabs that correspond with that method. And we're going to go over each method in detail. Here's just a few more reminders about the PLE tool. Again, it does calculate the weighted average price for all student paid lunch prices that are charged in the SFA. The maximum annual average price increase required will not exceed 10 cents. So that means you do not need to increase by more than 10 cents. However, if the tool shows that you need to increase by more than 10 cents, it may lead to some shortfall being carried over to the next school year, as some SFAs will not be required to raise their weighted average price, or they choose to contribute that revenue from non-federal sources to the nonprofit school food service account due to this 10-cent cap. Depending on where the SFA is relative to the weighted average price requirements for 25-26, a contribution less than 10 cents may be required. So the tool may show that you only need to increase by 5 cents. The SFA also has the option to do a price increase that does exceed that 10% cap, with the additional contribution being carried over for the next school year as credit. So you can increase 10 cents, more than 10 cents if you would like. However, the cap would be 10 cents is what is actually required. So let's get started. So to begin, the SFA will calculate the weighted average price requirement for school year 25-26. And to make this calculation, you will need the unrounded weighted average price for school year 24-25, or the most recent school year for which the data is available. So this information can be found on your 24-25 PLE tool report tab that was generated, again, on that previous year's PLE tool. It's going to be under section 1 in box A. I have it circled here on the screen, and this is a screenshot from the 24-25 tool. If this value is not known, the SFA will need their weighted average price all the way back to school year 2010-2011, as it can be used to find the unrounded weighted price for 24-25. So if you do not have your 24-25 tool or your report for your tool saved, you will need to use the calculator that we'll discuss in a couple of minutes to go all the way back to 2010-2011 to be able to get that unrounded weighted average price for 24-25. So if the weighted average price for 2010-2011 is not known, then the SFA will need the number of paid lunches that were sold in October of 2010, along with their associated prices. And this data would be used to help calculate the weighted average price for 2010-2011. So it's just a lot more work if you don't have your previous tool. So step 1, you're going to navigate to the 25-26 requirement calculator tab, which is located in tab 3. If the unrounded price requirement for 24-25, or the most recent school year which that data is available, you're going to enter that into cell A7, which is shaded in green with the little arrow here. And the tool will calculate the weighted average price requirement for 25-26 school year into cell B7, which is circled. on the screen. So there is an optional step here that says if you don't have the information you need. So if the unrounded price requirement for 24-25 is not known, then you will have to use the annual unrounded requirement finder, which is located also on tab 3, to calculate this value. So in this optional step, you're going to have to enter in the weighted average price for 2010-2011 into A13, which is shaded in green, to populate that unrounded price requirement for all previous school years. And then you're going to enter in the unrounded price requirement for 24-25 that is found in cell B31, which is circled. And you're going to take that number and put it into A7 that's shaded in green. And then the tool will calculate the weighted average price requirement for 25-26 into B7, which is also circled. Again, this is if you don't know that unrounded price requirement for 24-25, you would do this additional step. So if the weighted average price for 2010-2011 is not known, like we just talked about a few minutes ago, you're going to use the school year 2010-2011 price calculator tab, which is located in tab 8, to calculate this value. So on this time, this is whenever you need to have the October 2010 paid lunches sold with the different prices, and you're going to enter those in to columns B and C, the shaded green areas, to obtain that weighted average price for 2010-2011, and it's going to populate it into E16, which is the circled area. So again, this is if you don't have the weighted average price for 2010-2011. So once you do that, you're going to enter in the weighted average price for 2010-2011, like I said before, into cell A13, the green cell, of the annual unrounded requirement finder that's located in tab 3, to populate the unrounded price requirements for all previous school years. And then again, you're going to enter that unrounded price requirement for school year 24-25 into cell B31 and then into A7. And the tool is going to calculate. So basically a repeat of what I just talked about. So let's talk about if you're at or above equity. So if the unrounded price requirement for 24-25 school year, or the most recent school year that the data is available, is equal to or greater than $4.01, cell B7 will say at or above equity. If this is the case, then you're going to proceed. You're pretty much done with the tool, and you're going to proceed to the 25-26 report tab, which is in tab 7. So this is basically saying that you are charging enough and that you don't need to make any type of price adjustment or will not need to have funds supplemented into your account. So once you get into the 24-25 report tab 7, step 1 is to use the drop-down menu in cell A9 to select at or above equity. You're going to enter in the weighted average price into cell B10, which is shaded in green, and that field will only become visible when at or above equity option is selected. So that at this point, you would save the report to show that you are in compliance with the requirement and to reference back when you complete the PLE tool for 26-27 school year. So I just want to make one note in here that on the instructions page on the paid lunch equity tool, the USDA tool, it did have a typo. It does still show 25-26 school year when it should state 26-27. But if you follow the instructions on the screen, you should be fine. So let's talk about the utilization of the 25-26 PLE exemption. So if you qualify for that PLE exemption, you do not need to complete the tool. However, we talked about this before too, it is recommended that documentation is maintained to show that an exemption was provided, and you do put this on your annual online application whether you are exempt or not, and you do have to put your balance. To obtain this documentation, though, you can navigate to the report tab that's located in tab 7, and the documentation will be there. Supporting documentation to show that you're in compliance will be there as well. So in the report tab, tab 7, you're going to use the drop-down box, the drop-down menu in A9 to select utilization of the school year 25-26 PLE exemption. Then enter the weighted average price into cell B10, which is shaded in green, and you will certify that you had a positive or zero balance in the nonprofit school food service account as of June 30th by entering yes into cell B11, which is also shaded in green. Both fields will only become visible when the utilization of the 25-26 PLE exemption option is selected. So again, you're going to save this report to show that you are in compliance with the requirement and reference back to it when you complete the tool for 26-27 school year. So now that the average weighted price requirement has been calculated, SFAs then need to decide what method you're going to use to meet the requirement. And as we said before, there are 3 methods. Method 1, you're going to raise your price. Method 2, you're going to contribute non-federal sources to the nonprofit school food service account. Or method 3 is you're going to combine methods 1 and 2. You're going to raise your prices and you're going to use non-federal sources to contribute to your nonprofit school food service account. Again, depending on the method you choose will determine which calculator tabs of the tool that you will need to complete. And then to complete the tool, you will follow the instructions for the method you have selected. So let's talk about method 1, raise the average price of paid lunches. This set of instructions are for SFAs who want to raise the weighted average price of paid lunches to meet the weighted average price requirement. So if you're not going to be in compliance and you want to, if you know that you're not charging enough and you're choosing that you think you're going to raise your prices, this set of instructions is for you. So navigate to the 25-26 price raise calculator tab, which is tab 4. The weighted average price requirement for school year 25-26 will be located at the top of the calculator, as well as the price requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. So that section that's circled on the screen is where you're going to find that. With the exception of the required weighted average price increase with the 10 cents cap, the overview of calculations that the tool calculates is based on the assumption that SFAs will want to meet the requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. So to continue on with method 1, step 1, using the school year 24-25 weighted average price calculator, that should be 25-26 average price calculator located in tab 4, enter in the number of paid lunches from October 2024 with their associated prices into columns B and C, which are shaded in green where the little arrow is pointing. Prices should be inclusive of all school levels, so elementary, middle, and high. If you have different prices for different grade levels, that all has to be included. The tool will calculate the weighted average price into cell E22. And as a reminder, if the price is equal to or above the target price of $4.01, then the SFA is compliant with the requirement. So continuing on with step 1, the tool is then going to calculate that total price increase for 25-26 based on the requirement that's rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. It's going to also calculate the required weighted average price for 25-26 with the increase with the 10-cent cap. It's also going to calculate the remaining shortfall to meet the total price increase. And then it's also going to calculate any credit from the total price increase for 25-26. So that's going to all populate into that area that's circled on the screen. So now SFAs must determine whether any shortfall or credit needs to be carried forward from last school year from 24-25 into 25-26 school year. This information can be found on your previous school year's PLE report. So for the 24-25 school year PLE report, and that's going to be in section 2. And on this slide is a screenshot from the 24-25 PLE2 encircled where you're going to find this information. Any shortfall will be added into the calculations are going to be found in block A, and remaining increase carried forward into the 25-26, and then any credit will be subtracted from the calculations. That's going to be found in block B, called remaining credit carried forward to 25-26. So method 1, step 2. So in step 2, you're going to enter any shortfall or credit into cell A26 that's shaded in green. Any shortfall will be entered in as a negative value, and any credit will be entered in as a positive value. If there is no shortfall or no credit that needs to be carried forward, then A26 is going to remain blank. And then once any shortfall or credit has been accounted for, the tool is going to adjust. It's going to adjust the total price increase. It's going to adjust the required weighted average price. It's going to adjust the remaining shortfall to meet the total price increase. And it's going to also adjust the credit. So all of that area in that circled will be adjusted once you enter what you need to enter into A26. And as a reminder, these values are based on the assumption that SFAs will want to meet the requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. And this information is shown for awareness purposes only, as the price that gets finalized on the report is what determines the actual shortfall or credit that will be issued for next school year. So this is an optional step for method 1. You can use the pricing estimation calculator that's located in tab 4 to determine how you want to distribute the price increase within the SFA to reach the required weighted average price for 25-26. You do have the flexibility to raise individual student prices using many different price combinations. So you can enter the number of paid lunches from October 2024 with their associated prices into columns B and C that are shaded in green with the little arrow. And SFAs, you will then change the student paid lunch prices until the value in cell E50, which is the one circled, reaches the required weighted average price for 25-26 with the 10 cents cap. So this is just a calculator that you can use to see how you're going to raise your prices. Again, this is an optional step. So method 1, step 3, you're going to navigate to the 25-26 PLE report, which is located in tab 7. Under section 1, you will see the weighted average price requirement to the nearest cent and rounded down to the nearest 5 cent for reference. So you're going to use that drop-down menu in cell A9, and you're going to select method 1, raise the weighted average price of paid lunches. You're going to enter the weighted average price that you're going to establish for 25-26 school year into block C, which is cell B15, that's the one that's shaded in green. And then once the price is entered, the report will generate any shortfall or credit that will be carried forward based on how the price compares to the required weighted average increase with that 10 cent cap that's going to be shown in cell A31 of the price raise calculator. You will save this report to show that you are in compliance with the requirement and then reference it back for the following year whenever you're going to complete 26-27 PLE2. So if you're doing step 1, that is your instruction. So if you're planning to raise your prices, you follow those instructions. The next set of instructions, which is method 2, is contributing revenue from non-federal sources to the nonprofit school food service account. So this set of instructions are for the SFAs that want to contribute or plan to contribute revenue from non-federal sources into the nonprofit school food service account to meet the requirements. So in other words, if you're not planning to increase your prices, but you're not meeting the requirements, then you will need to have revenue from non-federal sources put into the nonprofit school food service account. So to begin, you're going to navigate to the non-federal calculator, which is located in tab 5. And for reference, the weighted average price requirements for 25-26 will be located at the top of the calculator, as well as the price requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. So step 1, if known, you will enter in the weighted average price for the 24-25 school year into cell A10, which is shaded in green with the arrow. As a reminder, if the price again is equal to or above the target price of $4.01, then you are compliant with the requirement and the tool will calculate the total price increase for 25-26 into B32, which is where it's circled. If the price is not known, do not enter anything into A10, as it will link to the price SFAs manually calculated when we talk about the optional step next. So this is the optional step if it's not known. So using that 24-25 weighted average calculator located in tab 5, SFAs will enter the number of paid lunches from October 2024 with their associated prices into columns B and C, which are shaded in green where the arrow is pointing. Prices should be inclusive, again, of all school levels, so all prices. And the tool will calculate the weighted average price for 24-25 into cell E27, which is circled on the screen. The price will automatically populate into cell A10, which is shaded in green and circled. If the link was accidentally erased, then you would need to manually enter in that value into cell A10. The tool will calculate the total price increase from 25-26 based on the requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents into cell B32, which is circled on the screen as well. So for method 2, step 2, you're going to enter the total number of student paid lunches served in 23-24 into cell A32, which is shaded in green. The tool will calculate the total revenue from non-federal sources for 24-25, the amount of revenue from non-federal sources for 24-25, the required price increase for 24-25, and the required amount of revenue from non-federal sources for school year 24-25 with the 10-cent cap. It will also calculate the remaining shortfall to be carried forward to 25-26 and the remaining credit to be carried forward for 25-26. If no shortfall or credit needs to be carried forward, A36 will remain blank. So step 2, continue. You must determine whether any shortfall or credit needs to be carried forward from 24-25 into 25-26. And again, this is where you refer back to the 24-25 paid lunch equity tool report. And this will be found under section 2. And this is a screenshot from the 24-25 PLE report. Any shortfall will be added into the calculations that are going to be found in block D. And that's going to be called the remaining annual non-federal source contribution carried forward to school year 25-26. So step 3 for method 2, you will enter any shortfall or credit into cell A36 shaded in green. Any shortfall will be entered in as a negative value, and any credit will be entered in as a positive value. If no shortfall or credit needs to be carried forward, A36 will remain blank. So continuing on to step 3, once any shortfall of credit has been accounted for, the tool is going to adjust everything that is circled here. It's going to adjust the amount of revenue from non-federal sources. It's going to adjust the required price increase for 25-26. It's going to adjust the required amount of revenue from non-federal sources. It's going to also adjust the remaining shortfall and also the credit of total price increase. So step 4 for method 2, to create the summary, you're going to navigate to the 25-26 report that's located in tab 7. And under section 1, you're going to see the weighted average price requirement to the nearest cent rounded down to the nearest 5 cent for reference. And using that drop-down menu in cell A9, you will select method 2, contribute revenue from non-federal sources to the nonprofit food service account. And then you will enter in the amount of revenue from non-federal sources that you will contribute for school year 25-26 into block F, which is cell B19, which is shaded in green. And then once an amount is entered, the report will generate any shortfall or credit that will be carried forward based on how the amount compares to the required amount of revenue with that 10-cent cap shown in A41 of the split calculator. SFAs can enter any non-federal revenue sources funds that will come from into block G, which is cell A21 shaded in green. And they can also indicate any general fund transfers that will occur in block H, which is cell A23, which is also shaded in green. And again, you're going to save this report to show that you're in compliance with the requirement and to reference it back when you complete the 26-27 school year paid lunch equity tool. So again, those instructions for if you were going to contribute non-federal sources. So the next set of instructions is going to be method 3, which is to split the requirement by raising the weighted average price and contributing funds from non-federal sources to the nonprofit food service account. So basically combining methods 1 and 2. So these instructions are only for SFAs that want to do both. You want to raise the price and you're also going to contribute non-federal sources. All right, so to begin, you're going to navigate to the 25-26 split calculator tab, which is tab 6. And for reference, the weighted average price requirement for 25-26 will be located at the top of the calculator, as well as the price requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. With the exception of the required weighted average price increase with the 10-cent cap and the amount of revenue needed with the 10 cents cap, the overview of the calculation that the tool calculates, again, is based on the assumption that SFAs will want to meet the requirement rounded down to the nearest 5 cents. So step 1, you're going to use the weighted average price calculator, which is located in tab 6, and SFAs will enter the number of paid lunches from October 2024 with their associated prices into columns B and C that are shaded in green. Your prices, again, will have to include all schools, elementary, middle, and high, so all prices at all school grade levels. And as a reminder, if the price is equal to or above the target of $4.01, then you are compliant with the requirement. So the tool is going to calculate the weighted average price, the total price increase, the required weighted average price, and the required price increase. That's the sections that are circled on this slide. So step 2 is if known, SFAs will enter the weighted average price they plan to charge for paid lunches into cell A30, which is shaded in green with the bottom with the arrow, to split their requirement. If this price is not known, you can manually calculate it using the optional step that we will talk about next. So the optional step for method 3 is you're going to use the pricing estimation calculator, which is located on tab 6. And SFAs will enter the number of paid lunches expected to be served for 1 month, as well as their associated prices, into columns B and C that are shaded in green with the arrow here. Prices should be inclusive again of all school and all grade levels. The tool will then calculate the weighted average price for 25-26 into cell E45, which is circled. SFAs will then input the weighted average price for 25-26 into cell A30, which is shaded in green towards the top of your screen with the arrow. And the tool will then calculate the total price increase for 25-26 school year based on the requirement that's rounded down to the nearest 5 cents into cell B50, which is towards the bottom, that's circled. So step 3 for method 3, you're going to enter the total number of student paid lunches served into cell A50, which is shaded in green. And the tool will then calculate the total revenue from non-federal sources, the amount of revenue from non-federal sources, the required price increase, the required amount of revenue from non-federal sources, the remaining shortfall, and the credit from the total price increase. So again, everything that's circled is what it's going to calculate. So continuing on with step 3, you're going to determine whether any shortfall or credit needs to be carried forward from 24-25 into 25-26. So again, this is where you refer back to your 24-25 PLE tool report. And that section is going to be section 2 on the PLE report. It's circled here. This is a screenshot from the 24-25 report. Any shortfall will be added into the calculations are going to be found in block I, which is called remaining annual non-federal source contribution. And then any credit will be subtracted from the calculations that can be found in block J, called the remaining credit carried forward. So method 3, step 4, at this point, you will enter any shortfall or credit into cell A54, which is shaded in green on the screen. Any shortfall again will be entered in as a negative value, and any credit will be entered in as a positive value. And if there is no shortfall or credit that needs to be carried forward, then A54 will remain blank. And then once those shortfall or credit has been accounted for, again, the tool will adjust like it did for the others, and it's going to adjust the amount of revenue from non-federal sources. It's going to adjust the required price increase. It's going to adjust the required amount of revenue from non-federal sources. It's going to adjust the remaining shortfall to meet that total price increase. And also it's going to adjust any credit from the total price increase. And then step 5 for method 3 is you're going to create your summary. So you're going to navigate to the 25-26 report located in tab 7. And under section 1, you're going to see the weighted average price requirement to the nearest cent rounded down to the nearest 5 cent. And then using the drop-down menu in cell A9, you're going to select method 3, split the requirement by raising the weighted average lunch price and contributing revenue from non-federal sources to the nonprofit food service account. And then you will enter in the amount of revenue from non-federal sources that you will contribute for 25-26 into block L, which is cell B28, which is shaded in green. And then once an amount is entered, the report will generate any shortfall or credit that will be carried forward based on how that amount compares to the required amount of revenue with that 10-cent cap shown in cell A59 of the split calculator. SFAs will then enter any non-federal revenue sources funds will come into block M, which is cell A30, which is shaded in green. And you can also indicate any general fund transfers that will occur. You're going to put that in block N, which is cell A32, which is also shaded in green. And then again, you will save this report to show you are in compliance and reference back to it whenever you complete the 26-27 PLE tool. So I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time. It's really not going to make sense until you actually are in the tool and working in the tool. If you're used to doing the PLE tool, it's pretty much the same as it was last year. If you've never done the PLE tool before, it will take some time to get used to. Just follow the step-by-step instructions. The decision is really if you know that you're not going to have to meet the $4.01 requirement, you just have to make the choice of what are you going to do. Are you going to raise your prices? Are you going to contribute non-federal sources? Or are you going to do a combination of both? So at this time, I will look to see if we have anything in the chat. But again, you can always email us or call us with your questions. Again, this is only for SFAs that are pricing, that are required to do the PLE tool. You will have to add it to your application, not the actual tool itself, but you will have to choose if you did the PLE tool, if you were exempt from the PLE tool, and what your positive balance was. If you chose to not do if you were exempt from doing the PLE tool, this is one of the things that is checked on an administrative review. So please ensure that you are doing it and that you are following and meeting the requirements that the tool says you need to do. Okay, I am not seeing any questions in the chat. So with that, I will let everyone go. Again, if you have any questions, you can always call or email us, and we'll be happy to help you. Thanks for attending today's training. And again, I hope everyone has a great afternoon and the rest of the week. I know summer is halfway through for some of you. We will be, for those of you that are questioning about average meal cost, we will be providing guidance on that as soon as we possibly can. It's just that we're waiting on one final clarification from USDA before we let that guidance out. So, all right, thank you, everyone.